Chapter 9 on the first organisms that actually are true multicellular and have tissues. Those would be, for starters, the peripherans, which are the sponges. They don't have tissues, but they do have divisional labors among cells. So some of them are organized for food acquisition and for independent function. Then we'll move into the cnidarians and the ctenophores. So these are going to be some of the sponges, or not the sponges, the sea jellies. You may know them better as jellyfish, and the sea walnuts, which you may not be as familiar with. You can see them off the East Coast, but they kind of look familiar. They're very similar in appearance to a jellyfish, or a sea jelly as it's more properly called, but they don't have the tentacles, or the tentacles aren't as visible. These actually have tissue level organization and different common ancestors. So if we're looking at these groups evolutionarily, you have protists first, and then all those three groups branching off before we get groups that include mollusks, annelids, which are earthworms, the platyhelms, which are the flatworms, and a few other small groups. Then we get, although you notice this is a pretty big group, but that's because there are so many different kinds of worms and mollusks, shelled bivalve organisms, so clams too. Then we have the ecdysomes. These are insects and roundworms. And then finally, everything else. So all the chordates, anything else with a backbone. The peripherans. So these are, of course, sponges are radially symmetrical. They do have different kinds of cells. Those three cell types serve different purposes. The pinacocytes you'll find on the outer surfaces. Some of them are going to contract and be contractile. Others of them are just going to be porous. Then we have what's called the mesohyl. That's just a jelly-like middle layer. Then we have the mesenchyme cells. These cells look like little amoeboids, and they are for a variety of purposes, not the least of which is reproduction. They also secrete skeletal elements, which are called spicules in the sponges. They also transport and store food. They have a variety of purposes. And then finally we have the choanocytes, or sometimes called collar cells. These cells are flagellated. They're very specialized in their function. We'll show you up close what a collar cell looks like. So this is a collar cell. They have these little rings of fringe. This does a couple things. One, it can trap food particles. It also, you'll notice it also has a little flagellum. It also can help with water currents and making sure that the water is moving in the right direction throughout the cell. Make sure I got everything up here. There is in the sponges, in many cases, a central cavity. Other cases, there is a series of branching chambers, and in these cases, water circulates through during filter feeding. But again, no tissues or organs in any of the sponges. Within the sponges, you'll find three distinct classes. These classes are distinguished by the kinds of spicules. So the kinds of composition of their spicules. So for the calcarea, the spicules are made of calcium carbonate. For the glass sponges, they're made of silica and they have 6 rays. For the Demospongiinae, they're silicate or spongin. These are what some of the spicules look like. So, sponges come in 3 general forms or body structures. The most simple of them are the ascons. In this case, water comes in through the sides and out the central cavity. And in all these cases, they are trapping food particles as they go. In the syncon or synconoid is how they're generally, or asconoid form, you have water coming a little more elaborate pathway, coming in here, dropping down, and then up through. So there's a greater likelihood they will filter the water more efficiently. Then we have the leuconoid form, in which case water is going to travel in and out, or in and out. So there are multiple osculums, multiple pathways, multiple exit transfer possibilities. So in this pattern, in this structural form, they're maximizing efficiency of water filtering. This sponge form is what people are going to think of when they see an actual sponge. A household sponge, that's what they're based on. Of course, most household sponges are synthetic, but that's what the original ones were based on. They are filter feeders. They're trapping food, and then they're digesting them by lysosomal enzymes. Waste removal and gas exchange is all diffusion. And they do have some individual cell response for coordination. Reproduction, they are monoecious, meaning that each individual has both male and female sex organs. Another name for monoecious would be hermaphroditic. So in some cases, the collar cells or choanocytes lose their collars and flagella and undergo meiosis. And external fertilization is most common in planktonic larvae in most cases. In asexual reproduction, gemmules are frequently released, in some cases in both freshwater and marine species. So in this case, these are what gemmules look like. So those are released as daughter colonies. The cnidarians. These are also radially symmetrical, or possibly sometimes modified as biradially symmetrical. They do have a mesoglia, which exists right here. It's gelatinous. That mesoglia is between the epidermal and the gastrodermal tissue, so it's between the outside layer and the gastrovascular cavity, which is essentially the gastrodermal tissue. They do have a proper gastrovascular cavity. They also have their nerve cells organized into a nerve net. We've seen no organization into something, any kind of sophisticated neural activity, any kind of a ganglion mass mimicking a brain of any kind. So this is the most sophisticated neural organization we've seen to this point, and it's called a nerve net. This nerve net spans around the bell of the sea jelly. They also have very specialized cells called cnidocytes. They're used in defense. They're also used in feeding and attachment. We'll talk about them further later. The body wall, I already pointed out the mesoglea, that's jelly-like, and it's in between the epidermis and the gastrodermis. Epidermis is the outside layer, gastrodermis is the inside layer. And here that is in pictures. The cnidarians have two general body forms. They have the sea jelly, which is what you think of, but they also have this body form as well, which is more of what you would think of from a hydra. That's present in most forms, but not all. Both of those forms are. Okay, then back to the cnidocytes. These cnidocytes are cells that, the actual cells that produce the cnida. These are what are going to create the sting that are associated with sea jellies. There are 30 types, up to 30 types, used for gathering food, used for defense. They are pressure loaded so that as soon as a pressure hits the cnidocell, this will react, be released. Generalized cnidarian life cycle includes both polyp and medusa form. So this is the bell form, this is the hydra form. So what we have is a polyp budding into a medusa form, the medusa producing an egg and sperm, which will be fertilized to produce a zygote. That zygote developing into what we call a blastula, which then develops into a planula and then forms a polyp. Not, as I said, not all stages, not all individuals of cnidarians go through all of these stages, but that's the generalized life cycle. The gastrovascular cavity is responsible for digestion, gas exchange, excretion, reproduction, and also houses a hydrostatic skeleton. A hydrostatic skeleton is a skeleton that is supported by water. It also is responsible for movement. The cells act against a water-filled cavity. The nerve net is what coordinates those movements. Reproduction. For that reproduction, the medusa is dioecious, so it has male and female form. External fertilization is most common. They can also reproduce by budding, in which case the polyp can actually bud off little baby polyps that are going to be genetically identical, little clones of the existing polyp. The hydrozoans, these are mostly marine. Some of them are freshwater. So this is within the cnidarians. They do have nematocysts, but they're only epidermal. The gametes are also epidermal and are released outside of the body. And it does have a medusa form. So this is the medusa form. It does reproduce sexually and forms the blastula with a swimming planula. So that planula actually affixes itself to a substrate and produces the hydra form. Then that hydra form releases a medusa. This would be an example you can see here. The scyphozoans are marine. Medusa is dominant in the life periods. It does not have a velum. The cnidocytes are found epidermally and gastrodermally. And the gametes are gastrodermal too, and they are dioecious, so there's both male and female form. The representatives for the Scyphozoans, this is the most common. This is Aurelia. Things to note for the Scyphozoans is that along the margin of the bell you'll find the ring canal. So here's the Aurelia life history. Important distinction for this particular group is that it strobulates. So when the polyp, the planula, affixes itself and forms a schistosoma, but that then strobulates, so it looks like this little stack of plates. Each one of those breaks off, becomes an ephyra, and those ephyra then become a medusa. It's very distinctive for that class. The cubozoans are called the cubozoans because they are actually square sea jellies. They're not an abundant group, but they're a distinctive group. So the tentacles only hang from the corners. They're tropical and they're extremely dangerous. Their nematocysts are very toxic. The anthozoans are colonial or solitary. It's more distinctive that they're colonial because most of the sea jellies are not. They do lack a medusa form, and the cnidocytes lack cnidocils, so the little trigger is not there. So these guys are existing only as hydra, in the hydra form. That means that these are the anemones and the corals. They're still toxic, they still have a sting to them, but they're not firing like the others are. There they are. The anemone in this picture is over here. That's a hermit crab. They actually will carry around anemones because it actually helps protect them from predators like octopi. Symbiotic relationship. And there we have anemone. Reproduction for this group is by petal laceration. So if the petal is the bottom part of the anemone, if a portion of that breaks off, they can actually form a new anemone. Or they can also longitudinally or transverse fission. So if they slice themselves in half or a third, they can actually form two new individuals. Sexual reproduction, some species are monoecious, some species are dioecious. External fertilization is most common and it does produce a planule. The monoecious species are protantrous, which means that they switch genders as they age. So the males, it's male gametes mature first. So you were male first, but then as you age, you turn into a female. Clownfish do the same thing. That's actually why Nemo couldn't find his quote-unquote mom, because mom turned into a dad. Corals. The corals produce a skeleton out of calcium carbonate. So they're actually living there, and then they actually produce the skeleton around them. They reproduce by asexual budding. That's what expands the colony. And they have a symbiotic relationship with zooxanthellae, which is an algae. Specific type of coral are octocorallian. These exist in warm waters. They have typically 8 tentacles. 8, so they have a mesentery for each tentacle. Mesentery is part of the digestive system. And there they are. A different coral than what you think most people think of when they think of coral. The ctenophores. These are comb jellies, sometimes called sea walnuts. They look like walnut-shaped sea jellies that have rows of cilia going down them. That's how they move, are their cilia. They are biradially symmetrical. They do have a mesoglia. They actually have muscle cells. They have a nerve net as well. Some of them do actually bioluminesce. Oh, and as I mentioned, they do have tentacles, but they're very difficult to see. I have actually seen these off the East Coast. They tend to be colonial. They tend to be in groups, but the tentacles are difficult to distinguish. Most people wouldn't notice them because they're relatively small, the ones you see off the shore, but that's them.